evening. When you say pass the salt in Britain, you are reaching into Cheshire and clutching at history. Cheshire is built on and has occasionally fallen into a salt lake, a dead sea, 500 feet down, 80 feet deep, and 200 million years old. When the salt water from that sea bubbled to the surface, and men found that it was saltier than the water of the ocean, they boiled the brine to extract the salt. Where they did that, the place came to be called, in the Middle Ages, a witch. And so the witches of Cheshire are not disagreeable old women like the Lancashire witches of Pendle Hill, but towns, salt towns. And these are they: Northwich, Middlewich, and no, not Southwich, Nantwich. These three towns in mid-Cheshire were the centre of a thriving salt industry at the time of the Doomsday Survey. And recent excavations in Middlewich have revealed that the salt industry was already flourishing there when the Romans were there. Nantwich, whose brine was always weaker than Northwich brine, began to fade as a salt town at the end of the 17th century, and Winsford took its place. In the 19th century, the salt feed was extended east towards Sandbach. But even with that extension, the salt area of Cheshire has never been more than 15 miles long and 7 miles wide, spread across the valleys of three rivers, the Weaver, the Dane, and the Wheelock. This is the Cheshire Salt Land. And from here, Cheshire has supplied and still supplies the nation with salt. Not that it's the only place in Britain. There are smaller salt fields up and down the country, and a large concealed field in East Yorkshire. But the Cheshire field was the biggest and is the easiest to tap. And so, for centuries, salt merchants carried the salt from Cheshire on trains of pack horses along arduous trails long forgotten. But the signposts to those trails linger in local place names like Salters Brook up the Longdendale Valley at Woodhead, Salters Ford and Salters Gate, both near Wigan, and countless others. For centuries, the men in the Cheshire witches boiled the brine with no thought of where the brine springs came from or why the water was salty. They discovered the answer in 1670. The need for more and more fuel to boil the brine and a shortage of wood to burn drove them to prospect for coal, and they dug down on the Marbury estate near Northwich, and they struck salt, rock salt. There was, of course, no coal, because this was a dead sea that had contained no living thing, and therefore no fossils or fossil fuel. But the salt sea was now rock salt, brown from the sand that had blown over it. But rock salt required even more fuel than brine to refine it, and so they made the River Weaver navigable so that it might carry coal into Cheshire and salt out from Cheshire. The navigation, as they called it, opened in 1733, and for the next 100 years, men made fortune digging the salt, pumping the brine, emptying the underneath of Cheshire. And then, one day, in 1838, a gentleman in Northwich awoke to discover that his fruit garden had fallen 100 feet during the night. Cheshire was caving in. It was paying the cost of those centuries of activity when open-pan salt works were clustered along the banks of the Weaver by the hundred. That was the traditional way of producing salt, the method used since the Romans. Today, there is only one open-pan salt works left, the Lion Works at Marston near Northwich, and Frank Mellor went there.
This is the way they were producing salt in Cheshire 3,000 years ago. The hard way, evaporating water from brine. Unrefined it may be, even coarse, but there's nothing common about it. Favoured by the fattest, savoured by the epicure, it sprinkles distinction on even the humblest bag of fish and chips. Sweating over a hot pan is the lumpman's lot. The prophylactic tang rots his boots, but at least it keeps him free of head colds. Out of the pan, into the tub, to drain and harden. And hey presto, the last open pan in Europe has turned brine into pillars of salt. In the old days, the pan was fired by coal. Now it's oil. Otherwise, the day and night routine hasn't varied since the Lion Works opened nearly 150 years ago. Bypassed by technology, it's a steaming anachronism. Pure, natural, old-fashioned block salt, as recommended by Mrs. Beeton for preserving beans and curing hams. Unlike newfangled table salt, it absorbs moisture from the air, so the nearest it comes to running is when it's wheeled into the storeroom. Salt blocks by the thousand. It's been the Thompson family's business since the early 1700s. These days, Jonathan Thompson is the salesman.
When you think about salt, this is the real stuff.
The real additive-free salt, yes.
So who buys this sort of salt?
People who are interested in health foods, whole foods, and people who prefer something with the true salt taste.
You've been producing this kind of salt here for a long, long time. What, about 140 years?
140 years, that's right.
And has it changed? Has the method of production changed over that time?
We can't. There's only really one way to make block salt, and that is the same principle which has been going on since about 1842.
You are, in fact, the only firm producing this open pan salt.
That's
I mean,
right.
why is that? Why have all the others gone out of business?
I think mainly because of the overheads, really. And the other salt is far cheaper to produce.
There are problems, of course, with producing this kind of salt. I mean, corrosion seems to be one. I mean, the factory sort of falls to bits every now and again, doesn't it?
The salt corrodes everything. You name it, it'll corrode it, even wood and brickwork.
Especially the winter, for seasoning paths and doorsteps. The only block salt works left in the world, and an output enough, apparently, to get passing traffic quite steamed up. A whiff of salt on the breeze, and the average Englishman turns his mind to splicing the main brace and similar nautical thoughts. Locked in combat with a lock, the great challenge of sailing before the mast down the Trent and Mersey. Footing along at a gentle, almost forgotten pace, circumnavigating the watery byways of mid-Cheshire. Nothing more to worry about than getting off on the right foot, on the dry side, staying afloat and tying up for the night. The modern boatie has a fortnight off, a roving bent, and a family who'll jump to it. It all seems to be pleasure boats and recreation along here, but at one time Middlewich was the centre of the Cheshire salt industry. That was back in Roman days, when in fact it was called Salinac, Latin for salt works. It stands on a network of rivers and canals which first opened up the local economy by carrying Cheshire salt to the outside world. A century ago, the Trent and Mersey helped to carry 1 million tonnes of block salt a year, destined chiefly for Africa. Middlewich, the smallest of the witches, hasn't panned a pinch of salt since 1969, and the export trade has almost vanished. Originally, the most important of the salt witches was Nantwich, and it's certainly the best preserved. It was mentioned in the Domesday Book, and at the time of Henry VIII, there were no fewer than 300 salt works in the town. This is Welsh Row, part Elizabethan, part Georgian, the road that leads to Wales. The story goes that Henry III, in an attempt to subdue the unruly Welsh, stopped their salt supply. It simply meant that the Welsh had to eat unsalted leeks. Meanwhile, Nantwich prospered, and much of its timbered, well-seasoned antiquity still defies dry-rotted woodworm. Northwich, on the banks of the navigable River Weaver, was the great Cheshire salt centre of the 19th century. There were once scores of salt pans all steaming merrily away and filling the Weaver Valley. Besides the scars of the old industry, Northwich has dozens of these mock Tudor buildings. Not so much picturesque as functional, because the timbered frames proved better able to withstand the problems of subsidence. Problems no longer as serious, though there's always someone tempting Providence. All black and white and nouveau quaint, with just an occasional departure from the perpendicular. Shades of the time when whole streets were tilted and twisted, and all their inhabitants went downstairs when they should have been going up. Northwich may have pulled itself together, but they still talk about the morning after the night in 1880 when the Platts Hill mine vanished in a flash of deep water. It was like living in an earthquake zone. Streets were always heaving and cracking, so they'd raise the level of the roads to keep them on a level with the shops, which, as they sank lower, had to be built higher. Very confusing for the customer. Then there was the property which subsided beyond hope. Many a whole terrace fell victim to some wild brine pumper 2 or 3 miles away. As for holes in the ground, the finest of them all appeared in 1912, where the Marston mine had been. Unlike coal mining, which used to slowly build its scars upwards, salt mining scars were caused by the surface suddenly collapsing into the workings to produce the flashes of all shapes and sizes that you find throughout the area. The Ashton flash, for instance, used to be the Ashton salt mine, which one dark night 140 years ago caved in to engulf 12 workmen and the engine house. It was easily the worst disaster in the area. One day a salt mine, the next a huge water-filled crater. It's since been used to dump brine waste from the local chemical works. The brine sludge is slowly drying out, and the area will eventually be reclaimed as pasture land. But all that collapses is not lost, for there are other flashes, like this one at Winsford, which became instant beauty spots. The banks of the River Weaver crumbled overnight to form a 90-acre lake, which is now used by one of the most successful sailing clubs in the north of England, 400 members and 150 boats. But its days as a haven for amateur sailors could be numbered, for the river which so obligingly produced it is now busily filling it with silt. Sailing club official and the local council's building control officer, Bill Hawkin.
The area which is available to us for sailing is being reduced month by month, I would say.
And how long before it's so silted up that there'll be no more sailing?
Well, this is obviously a gradual process, but I would think within 10 years you'll have a marsh down here instead of a beautiful lake.
So subsidence has had its advantages over the years. I mean, this is one of them.
Well, that's a point of view, certainly. It's the sailors would agree with that. I doubt whether the landowners would.
It may be filling up underneath, but on the surface there's hardly a ripple.
You see, why did they let it happen to the landowners? Was it greed? Was it ignorance? And why so much around Northwich? With me is Lady Rochester, who's a great historian of the salt industry and much concerned with the Salt Museum at Northwich. Was it ignorance?
Mainly ignorance, I think, yes.
The mines used to fill up with salt, didn't they, with brine?
Well, the early practices were not very careful, and they allowed water to get in, and the mines became flooded and then couldn't be used. Water in a salt mine is fatal. And later, as they used them as big reservoirs, underground reservoirs, to pump brine for the salt works. And as they did this, more water, fresh water, got in and ate away the pillars of salt that had been left to keep the roof of the mine.
And the whole lot just went plonk.
Yes, and then it gradually affected the level of water below the town. And this is what damaged the town so dreadfully.
Well, now, what about the poor townspeople? With me is Peter Warmby, who is the Chief Officer of the Cheshire Brine Subsidence Compensation Board, right?
That's it.
Now, if you suddenly find your land is sunk in Cheshire, you rush to the board and say, please, may I have some money?
You do, yes.
Was that easy to get compensation from the very beginning?
No. Originally, there was no right of compensation at all. They tried to establish a right in 1881. That was thrown out of Parliament. They succeeded in 1891. And the same principles which they established then apply today.
The principle is that you don't sue one person, you sue everybody.
That's it, yes.
Why is that?
Well, there were so many operating in the Northwich area at the time and the Winsford area that they couldn't point the finger at one individual and say, you've damaged my property, so therefore they failed at common law, and they then had to try legislation to gather all the pumpers together, levy a rate on them to provide a fund which was paid out in compensation.
Now, you're still in business. Does this mean that everywhere is still collapsing?
No, but certain parts of Cheshire are.
And do you think we can stop it now? I mean, we don't allow the practices we used to allow.
It will be stopped ultimately, I feel sure, because the policy of the county council is to phase out natural brine pumping in favour of the controlled method.
Well, we'll come to that in a moment, but do you think that Cheshire is permanently damaged?
No, apart from the areas that have been mined, there must be a risk there, and the areas where subsidence is taking place, severe subsidence at the present time, there will be a scar there, but apart from that, I think we shall return to stability.
Well, thank you both very much. Now, all the white salt made in Britain is made in Cheshire, but the use of salt is not confined to the seasoning of food. Salt is the basis of the alkali business, the chemical industry. From it they make caustic soda and soda ash, themselves essential raw materials in countless industrial processes. In the middle of the last century, the chemical industry began to centre on woodness. The Leblanc process of producing soda required supplies of salt, limestone, vitriol and coal, and woodness was handily placed by road, canal and the new railway. In 7 years, 7 different chemical plants opened in Widnes. The fumes from the factories poisoned the vegetation for miles around, and the sulphurous smell was appalling. But in 1873, 2 men, John Brunner, the son of a Swiss minister who'd founded it at Everton, and Ludwig Mond, a research chemist from Kassel in Germany, opened a chemical works in the middle of the Cheshire salt field at Winnington Hall. there to make soda by the new Belgian process, the Solvay or ammonia process, named after its inventor Ernest Solvay. It was cheaper, it was more efficient, and it was cleaner than the Leblanc process. All the Widnes firms using the old process then amalgamated to form the United Alkali Company in the hope of beating off the Brunner-Mond challenge. But Brunner-Mond prospered. "We are no longer making chemicals," said Mond, the research scientist, sadly. "We are making money." Competition between these big business firms was intense and tragic. Brunner-Mond supplied both Lever Brothers, the Port Sunlight soap firm, and the Cooperative Wholesale Society, the CWS, who were also big soap makers, with huge and regular supplies of soda. Roscoe Brunner, who'd succeeded John Brunner as chairman of Brunner-Mond, told Lever Brothers that he wanted to put up the price. Lever Brothers agreed, provided that the CWS, their competitors, were charged the same. The CWS refused, and without telling Levers this, Brunner put up the price to them. For the best part of 4 years, Lever Brothers unknowingly paid more than the CWS for their soda. But in the face of Lever's continuing suspicion, Roscoe Brunner's nerve broke, and he wrote to Lever Brothers revealing everything. Levers were prepared to sue, but the matter was settled out of court in 1925 for £1 million. Within months, when Brunner-Mond, the firm, had to join its old opponents United Alkali from Widnes and several others in an amalgamation to be called Imperial Chemical Industries, ICI. In October 1926, Roscoe Brunner, who had resigned as chairman of Brunner-Mond, learned, and I'm going to quote from the official history, that his was not one of the 12 names put forward for the board of the proposed new ICI. Hurt as he was, it was nothing to the fury of his wife, who set about making a public issue of the slight. On the 3rd of November 1926, he shot her, and then he shot himself. However, ICI, as we now know, was established, and the salt division, now the alkali division, was based at Winnington, where Brunner-Mond began. From small beginnings, Winnington has grown to be one of the largest works and the largest division of a very large company indeed. Above ground and below, much of the Cheshire salt industry is ICI, as Frank Mellor discovered.
As tranquil a pastoral scene as you'll find, where contented cows chomp away at the grass they convert into milk to be converted into Cheshire cheese. But 1,000 feet beneath me, there's another chemical process going on. The Cheshire salt field is being gradually dissolved into brine, to be pumped into a chemical industry that converts it into an amazing range of products, from weed killer to paint. 65,000 cubic yards of brine a day, and all you can see on the surface is something like this. It's all done by drills, computers and probes with magic eyes. When the drill has found the rock salt, water is pumped down. Nothing could be easier, not a pick or a shovel in sight. The water dissolves the salt that's then pumped to the surface as brine 6 times saltier than seawater. The dissolving rock creates a cavern that grows and grows for about 30 years. There are 100 of them under the Cheshire countryside. Pumping finally stops when the hole's so big that Liverpool Cathedral wouldn't touch the sides. It's called controlled pumping, the complete answer to the subsidence problem. The brine flows along pipelines to the nearby alkali works, or to be turned into salt crystals by the vacuum evaporation process that's overtaken the simmering open pan. The end product is the common, fast-pouring table salt that adds convenience to the cruet. It's called vacuum salt, and its natural crystal shape is cubic. Its uses are infinite. What's bread without salt? It's that little extra that simply makes it palatable. And to make margarine, first you remove every trace of taste from the oily ingredients. Then, with the help of salt, you'll not be able to tell it from margarine. Take the humble sausage skin. You have to cure it before you fill it. So you use another kind of salt called dendritic, fine-grained and able to absorb a lot of moisture. Salt for cheese, for canning, salt for pickling, for softening water, salt by the sack for Nigeria. It's a traditional but contracting export market. Without salt, there'd be no leather. Fine salt for curing skins, coarse, granular salt for tougher hides. Sides of bacon are first injected with a brine pickle, then stacked in a curing vat for 4 days. Salt, sodium chloride, is the starting point for a vast range of products, like soda ash, which goes by the lorry load into the making of glass. Brunner and Mond found their fortunes on this essential salt-based byproduct. And many a fortune's been made since out of the glassware that sparkles and tinkles in a million different guises. In the manufacture of rayon, it breaks down the wood pulp. The resulting mush is extruded as yarn that's knitted and woven into socks and jumpers and things, not to mention curtains and carpets. So many products depend on salt, perhaps it's the world's cheapest, most abundant raw material. Small boys may not entirely agree when they're told it goes into soap, but then it makes chlorine too, which keeps swimming pools hygienically safe.
Much the greater part of the salt used in the manufacture of chemicals is in the form of brine. Rock salt is used only for a few limited purposes, notably to salt the roads when there's ice and snow. In the 18th and 19th centuries, there were many salt mines in Cheshire. Today, there is only one, and of course we couldn't resist sending Frank Mellor down to the salt mine.
A great stockpile of rock salt on the surface, but it's all happening hundreds of feet down in a strange subterranean world where the temperature never changes and daylight never reaches.
You don't have to get dressed up like this to visit a cathedral crypt, but that's rather what this place is like, only on a fantastically bigger scale. Solid stone roof, massive supporting pillars, miles and miles of underground roadways. But in fact, we're something like 500 feet down among the Kuiper marls, somewhere between the Permian and Jurassic stratas, which is a fairly strong hint to any geologist worth his salt. And that's another way of saying worth his wages, for the Romans who started mining salt in Cheshire paid their soldiers in salt. And the Roman legionary called it his salarium, which is where the word salary comes from. But I fancy the Romans couldn't have known just how big the Cheshire salt field was. Otherwise, they'd all have been millionaires many millions of times over.
Machines go down the salt mine bit by bit to be assembled in an underground workshop. Mechanical mastodons that never return to the surface. It would be too expensive to bring them up, so when they're worn out, they're interred in a sort of elephant's graveyard. Diggers and dumpers, crushers and cutters. 2 miles from the shaft, through a labyrinth of gigantic grottos, a machine bites a slice out of the rock at ankle level, ready for blasting. It's one of several working faces in different sections of the mine. 200 men and an array of vastly expensive gadgetry working a non-stop 3-shift system to extract the rock that's 95% salt and 5% marl. First undercut, then the face is drilled with dozens of holes, neatly spaced 12 feet deep. The mine works to a production plan that depends on the skill of the shot firing team, on their ability to dislodge the required weight of rock, no more, no less. It's a job that concentrates the mind wonderfully, especially when the time comes to insert the charges. The muffled echo of a ramrod, an occasional voice, quickly lost in the emptiness of the mine. As each charge is compacted, it's primed and connected to the others with a spaghetti of coloured wires. The moment of truth, fingers crossed, or better still, bunged in the ears. £500 of explosive to bring 1,000 tons of rock crashing down. Then in moves the haulage gang to scoop up the rubble ready for the next shot. A grotesque mechanical ballet, a pas de deux for loader and dumper. Complete understanding between man and machine, machine and machine. A 6-ton mouthful of rock, a neat sidestep, a forward movement with bucket outstretched, and the dumpers waiting to take the strain. Then off, stage left, tripping heavily. Rock salt on its way back into the daylight it last saw 200 million years ago. Output from the Winsford mine has shot up phenomenally in the last 20 years to satisfy Britain's entire demand for road salt. The shuttle service between working face and mobile hopper is orchestrated so that production is kept flowing. 40 years ago, pick, shovel and pneumatic drill dug out 400 or 500 tons a week. Now it's up to 6,000 tons a day and still increasing. The hopper is part of a machine called a feeder breaker, which brings the biggest rocks down to size before sending them on the way by conveyor to another far-flung corner of the mine. Through an underground stockpile which evens out the flow, then off to the crushing plant to be graded into those finer grains required for spreading on roads. Like so many other production stages in the last of Britain's salt mines, the crushing process is remotely controlled. It's a matter of keeping a watchful eye on the lights and the buttons, and the computer does the rest, weighing and loading the salt for hoisting the 500 feet to the surface, smoothly, efficiently, automatically, in 9-ton skips. Up to the 1960s, the problem was storing rock salt in large quantities. It had a nasty habit of setting hard, so it all had to be used in and around Cheshire straight from the mine, shoveled onto lorries and away. But now, rock salt can be stored indefinitely, 1 million tons or more piled high at the pithead or waiting for snow in smaller heaps around the country. The secret is to spray your salt heap with a chemical that forms a thatch and keeps out the weather. So now it's an all-the-year-round business, with lorries carting it off winter and summer to council stockpiles from Land's End to John O'Groats. Meanwhile, scientists are trying to find other outlets for it. They've already discovered that a ton of rock salt on an acre of sugar beet guarantees a crop that will weigh an extra ton, and it's used to some extent in animal foods. Perhaps one day they'll even manage to prevent it corroding the wheels off your car.
Well, as I said, it's the history of Cheshire. Good night.